It's 5:30 and time to call this work session of the Fort Smith Public Schools Board of Education to order. We welcome any members of the public who are with us this evening. Citizen participation does take place at our regular board meetings, and the next one is scheduled for September the 23rd at 5:30 p.m. at the auditorium in Building B. In fact, it'll be right here, the Service Center. If you would like to address the board at that time, please see Mrs. Brooks, who's not with us this evening. But you can see, yes, there we go. The first item is to consider the approval of the 2019-2020 Child and Adult Care Food Program. Dr. Brubaker?
Yes, Mr. Mahan.
Madam President, members of the board, making sure that's on. The Special Nutrition Program, SMP, provides reimbursement for well-balanced, nutritious meals served to individuals enrolled in the CACFP. In Arkansas, CACFP is administered by the Arkansas Department of Human Services, Division of Child Care and Early Childhood Education, Special Nutrition Programs. Fort Smith School District will be reimbursed for required snacks provided to the preschool children. And this is an annual approval process for reimbursement that we bring to you to be redundant on an annual basis.
Are there any questions or discussion? This item will be brought back as an action item for the September 23rd regular board meeting. The next item on the agenda is a presentation about the district's summer reading program. Dr. Brubaker?
Yes, ma'am. So, last year we had a summer reading camp, and it was a great success. We took some of the strategies that had been used with some of our early elementary students and started to leverage them in some really exciting ways with some of the older kids. And so one of the comments that the board had made following the receipt of that data was, A, let's do it again, and B, let's make sure that they come back and tell us more about it. So, Mr. Mahan?
Yeah, you remember about a year ago we did a presentation on a smaller pilot of a summer reading program. And Dr. Kelly Mitten, our Director of Student Achievement and Accountability, and Ms. Kathy Ford, our Intervention and Dyslexia Coordinator, they're going to present information about an expanded summer reading program that we offered just last summer. The program was offered in 6 locations across the district in the month of June. It targeted students included 2018-19 5th, 6th, 7th grade students, as well as 9th and 10th grade students. Instruction using the Linda Mood Bell Sing Stars and visualizing and verbalizing programs was provided from 8 to noon, Monday through Thursday. Locations for this service was at Trustee Elementary, Spradley Elementary, Fairview Elementary, Beard Elementary, Darby Junior High, and Northside High School. And I'll turn it over to Ms. Kathy Ford to do a presentation.
Thank you. Yes, I'm really excited that we were able to expand the program this summer to 6 locations, and one of them being Northside High School, where we actually had 9th and 10th grade students come that very first day and stay in there for the whole 4 weeks. So that was an accomplishment for sure. We had 112 students participate this summer, and 23 of our 26 campuses, we had kids from all 23 of the 26 campuses, so that was also really exciting. Each of the students were administered a battery of assessments to determine exactly what their strengths and weaknesses were, and based on those, they were placed in one of two groups. The program has a component that addresses kids that are struggling with decoding, which means they are having trouble getting the words off the page and matching letters and sounds and putting it all together. And then we have those students that is not a problem at all, but they have trouble, they struggle with comprehension. So based on the testing results, the students are placed in one of the 2 groups. Our Seeing Star students, we had 66 students that had in that 30 or more hours. That was the cutoff for the data. So we had 66 students participate and with at least 30 hours of instruction. Seeing Stars focuses on building those foundational skills. And as you can see, we, again, like last year, made large standard score changes in the 3 focus areas that Seeing Stars really hits on. Both symbol imagery, word attack, and word recognition, we made really nice gains. Those 3 areas will eventually spill over and show an increase in accuracy and fluency. You really need more hours than what we did this summer. Was we had laid a really strong foundation, and then it will follow up in the school year to build on in the other areas. So this was really exciting for these kids. The next slide shows what happened in visualizing and verbalizing. Visualizing and verbalizing teaches kids how to make pictures while they read. Usually students that struggle with comprehension, they never get the movie going in their head like good readers do. When you're reading, you make those pictures in your head. This helps students learn how to do that. And as you can see, they made really good gains in comprehension from beginning of June. This is just from the beginning of June till the end of June during that 4-week period. So this is really exciting. Mm-hmm. We also thought that you might be interested in what happened to the kids this year that attended the pilot camp last summer. So we've pulled some data together there. If you remember, we invited 40 kids last year. We had 34 show up, and we had 31 hang in there through the whole 4 weeks with us. When we went to pull the data at the end, in July when we got the data back, 2 of those 31 had moved out of district. So we have 29 students that we're looking at a year later. Okay, so when they began the program, 29 of the students, they were all below the 25th percentile. We used 2017 data to select the students because we didn't have the 2018 data back yet. So in 2017, all 29 scored below the 25th percentile. In 2019, when we got the scores back in July, only 13 of those students scored below the 25th percentile. All 29 in 2017 scored in need of an improvement, and only 19 scored in need of improvement in 2019. So we were really pleased with that. We had, as far as growth, 55% of the kids scored above the 26th percentile in reading on their 2019 ACT Aspire scores. And what was really exciting to me is that, I don't want to say this wrong, I want to make sure I get the right number. Of those kids, we had 18 of them increase their percentile points more than 10 percentile points. And that is really exciting for these kids. So I'm real tickled. 24 of the 29 students went up in their percentiles in reading.
With growth matters, I think that's a really significant caption because growth matters morally with regards to student performance, but it also matters with regard to what results in schools' ultimate letter grade. Growth is one of those factors that plays a role in determining a school's letter grade. So even if the student is not ready on the high-stakes test, meeting their growth, meeting their growth target does yield the school points. It's 35% of the overall weight is based on growth, and 35% is based on straight achievement. So growth does matter from a number of perspectives.
So that's really exciting. And the last thing I would like to do is to read to you a letter that was written, this was written by a student at Northside. And he's a special ed student, but this was sent to me by one of the interventionists that are working, and I think you'll enjoy it. Okay, it says, Fifth Hour Class is Great by Pablo. Do you have a favorite class? My favorite class is Fifth Hour. That is my language arts class. I like it because it is quiet, it helps me, and I'm good at the assignments. One reason that I like Fifth Hour is because it is quiet. For example, no one talks in class until everyone is finished with the assignments. I like it quiet. It helps me to focus on the assignment. Another reason that I like Fifth Hour is because it helps me. We do Sing Stars. Sing Stars is where you can break apart words and sound them out. I am good at this because I practice. Now I can understand harder books. Last year, I could only read easy books. Fifth Hour is my favorite class. This is important because it's quiet. He likes quiet. It helps me, and I'm good at it. Sing Stars has helped me to improve my reading. Thank you, Ms. Jarvis, Mr. Doss, Mrs. Wintery, Mrs. Holwick, and Mr. Alex from Sing Stars. Try me and see my skills. Winners say, try me, and losers say, why me? I'm a winner.
Oh, gosh, that's so sweet.
Isn't that neat? That just makes me smile every time I read it. That's it for me, and I just want to thank you for giving us this opportunity to expand the program.
What did each student get when they completed it? You hadn't told
They
that.
get a Kindle Fire
Yeah.
when they complete. It's just amazing.
It really
I think we
is.
had, you were there, and I think several other board members were there to help present the Kindle Fires, and it's just Zena, you were there, so it's a really neat experience.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Have the teachers noticed a change in the students' attitude about coming to school?
Yes.
I'm assuming.
Yes. Another story that happened this summer was one of the teachers was at Walgreens, and their student had just come from the public library, and she had this whole bag full of books, and she told him that she had just come from the library, and she wanted him to see that she had checked out all these
Oh.
books, and that she could read them now. I can read these. I used to have to get easy books, but now I can read these books. So, yeah, they definitely can see the difference in the kids.
And they're enjoying reading.
Yes, yes.
It's not a chore.
It's not a chore.
And the gaps
So-
were being sustained, and that was really important to us, that whatever they achieved during the summer reading camp could be sustained throughout the course of the school year. We have a number of examples of that in this past year from Kimmons, where there were complete changes in the students' attendance and their discipline record and their grades,
So-
because they could read.
Mm-hmm.
So again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have a
We
question.
appreciate you.
I have a
Yes, ma'am.
question. I know 112 students is a large amount of students to have over the summertime,
Uh-huh.
but what percentage of those students represent those individuals that are currently performing below the appropriate grade level? Do you guys know that?
They were all performing. They were
But of the total population
of the of the total population.
Well, we had approximately 40 to 48% of our students who are proficient on the grade 3 through 10 test.
Mhm.
And then you have to look at, of that number, and I know this, let's see, I know this because there's new legislation regarding ESA that goes into effect 2023, is that right, Charles? That if you don't have X percent, if you have more than X percent of your students in the lowest performance category, which is the measure support. Do you want to do it right here? Dollars are directly.
You lose, yes.
What I'm speaking about? Well, I believe we had around 38% of our students who are performing in the lowest category. Now, that doesn't mean that there's a whole continuum in that in youth support category.
Absolutely.
But we still have a significant need to address.
Yes, and I think you're making my point that these are great numbers, and it's great to have the pilot and the results to back up this. But I think as a district, what can we do to, again, expand it even further? especially if we're trying to assist the pipeline, not to leave behind any of the students that are third grade plus. But if we are, we step down to fifth and sixth, expanded the schools that we're at, what are we doing to take it to the next level next summer?
Well, and I think beyond next summer, which we hope to have the opportunity to expand the services, but our true bang for our buck is during the course of the school year.
Yes.
The instruction provided by that classroom teacher. And Kathy is one of our district trainers relative to RISE. And you're probably all aware of the science of reading requirements and legislation around that, that is really allowing districts, enabling districts to focus on reading all the way through 12th grade. And the district has some really strong initiatives that we'll be talking about this week, actually, to ensure that we are addressing every child in any way possible who's scoring below the 25th percentile. And our principals do a fabulous job every quarter. We have that list of, and we do the data visits of students scoring in the 25th percentile or below. And the principals identify the kinds of support that they are receiving, and then we track progress from quarter to quarter.
I think it'd be interesting to see if that percentage, based on what you just said, continues to go down and doesn't increase. So I think it would be great for the district to see if those interventions are in fact happening at the school level, that it's working on all levels and not just one group focusing on this, but true collaboration amongst everyone.
Well, I think one of the things that has been so exciting to see is the chart for K2 that shows where these strategies are used almost universally, and they're part of the intervention program. The dramatic drop in the number of kids who are in those highest need
Categories.
groups.
Yeah.
Right. And so we found something that works well. And so now we just have got to continue to work as hard as we can to make that available to every kid. And I think we've got the right team in place to do that. And I appreciate the challenge. We're just going to have to keep working on it.
Well, and the interesting thing is just last week, I'm not going to mention the percentage, but someone, I think they were speaking incorrectly, but they gave me a very large percentage of the number of youth at one of the junior highs that were not on the appropriate reading level. And because I didn't have the data to challenge that, the individual made it in a large group setting, and so I'm like, I don't think that's correct, but that's why I think it's important for us to get this information out, all the intervention that's going on, to give a more accurate assessment of really what's going on and what we're doing to address the needs clearly. So,
Thank you, Ms. Ford. We appreciate it. Dr. Brubaker?
I have just one more item. It was a really busy summer, and I see that George and Sean are here, and we actually had some projects completed, some security projects as part of the capital improvement program. So we have a pretty exciting video to share with you tonight about the work done at Morrison. And it's quick. So, ready whenever you are, sir. I think you'll enjoy this.
When I first entered the building, I immediately got tears in my eyes, overwhelmed, overjoyed by the beautiful, beautiful work that's been done.
I think these walls are going to be good because we get it's going to be quiet and we get to learn more and focus on our stuff and on the project we're doing.
I love them. It's so modern that I give them rating at 11 out of 10.
I passed a parent on my way in who talked about her son having ADHD and how difficult it was with the noise and what a difference this would make in her child's life.
I think the new construction is important because it's going to help kids learn better and hear their teachers better and focus better.
I'm really confident about the next school year for my children. And I just can't wait to see, what happens with these new walls being built.
That's great.
So it's nice to see that all the planning, all the effort is paying off. So thank you all for your work. And it was pretty neat to see the former principal of Morrison come back and experience the building in a new way. I'd just like to add that I've been so impressed by our principal at Morrison, the work Brittany's done, and how great her team has been. Sometimes with construction projects, it's not best to go first, but they've been a great group to work with, and we're really, really proud of them.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is annual training. Each year, board members are required to complete 6 hours of annual training. There are 3 hours available through a regional training that will be held here in Fort Smith on October the 17th through the Arkansas School Board Association. This location may change depending on the number of participants. Tonight, we're going to have the opportunity to get additional earned hours toward the 6 hour requirement. Let's take a quick break after the end of the meeting and plan to be back in our seats to begin training at about 6:15. Otherwise, we are adjourned if there's no other business to come before the board. Thank you.
So no media. Mm-hmm. We just turn it on now. All right, I think we got the camera rolling, so I'll go ahead and start. Let me give you just a little history before we start on this. I know you all have been, tracking that we've been trying to update our policies. This Act 1029 of 2019 is one of a very large number of amendments to existing statutes or new statutes that were passed in the last session that resulted in the need to modify 118 policies and also create 4 new policies, which is where we are right now. At 118 policy amendments as a result of the last legislative session. And, not to give you too much of a history lesson, but unless a statute has what's called an emergency clause, and Greg knows this, then they become effective 90 days after the last day of the session. So no matter when they're passed, even if it's on day 1, they don't become effective until 90 days after. And that date this year was calculated sometime in the end of July. I have in my head it was July 24th is when all of those statutes became effective. And this one in particular is one, as you will see, requires board training, which is why we're here tonight. So unfortunately, this presentation includes looking at quite a bit of statutory language. I try always not to read PowerPoint slides. We'll actually have a few tonight. Act 1029 of 2019 requires that a school board member receive information regarding school safety and student discipline, including bullying and cyberbullying. I would suggest to you that you're the first board in the state of Arkansas doing this, is my expectation. And the reason I believe that is that the Department of Education is charged with the responsibility of developing some guidance, tracking the new amendments to the statute, and as of press time on this PowerPoint, they still have not done it. And similarly, this training usually will be offered by the ASBA. The Arkansas legislature is a little bit of the ASBA's annuity. They pass legislation that requires training, then the training gets put on by the ASBA, and then the districts pay the ASBA, which is how they get a lot of their funding. As of this year, they have authorized me to give training to the districts that I represent, but they still get their fee, even though I'm here doing the training. And I shared one email exchange with Dr. Brubaker, and that was when I sent this PowerPoint to the ASPA to get approval so you all could get your education hours tonight. The response I got was, well, can we use some of those slides?
That was a small fee.
That's right. All right, so all of this, or a lot of this statutory change is based upon a 2016 study that reported that 21% of students 12 to 18 years of age reported being bullied at school during the previous school year. This is part of what's called the preamble. When a new statute is passed, a lot of times they will just build narrative that tries to explain to the public why they're passing the statute. And so this is one of the reasons. The same study reported that 33% of students who reported being bullied indicated that they were bullied at least once or twice a month during the school year. I'm going to share some statistics with you in a few minutes that are even worse than what these national statistics are, including this one. A 2017 study from the CDC reported that Arkansas ranked the highest in the nation for the percentage of teenagers who were bullied on school property. Do you all remember that last year the governor had a task force on school safety and had an interim report and a final report? A lot of that was based upon the information that came out of the CDC in 2017. This was one of the statistics. This next one I'm about to show you actually comes from another presentation that I do. It does not relate directly to bullying as this statistic does, but it's more information from the CDC that is disturbing and I think actually dovetails into this issue, and it's worth, as a school board member, seeing these statistics. So these are the categories where Arkansas ranks first in the nation among high school students. So not just being bullied, but forcible sex, feeling sad or hopeless. 40.2% of high school students in Arkansas self-reported that they felt sad or hopeless. 23% had attempted suicide. 26% had made an actual plan to attempt suicide. 19% took pain medication without a prescription. So where are we second in the nation? Threatened or injury with a weapon at school, 11%, 1 out of 10 kids. In a physical fight at school, 1 out of 4. Actually attempted suicide, 15.8%, used cocaine, almost 10%, injected an illegal drug, 7.4%. Frightening statistics. Again, the legislature concluded that the persistence of school bullying has led to student suicide attempts. And they recognized that since these bullying statutes first came on the scene back in 2003 and the cyberbullying law in 2011, that there have been a lot of changes and a lot of new data points that they wanted to incorporate into the current law.
Is there any chance this is because we report it better than other states?
I don't believe so, and I don't know all of the history of the CDC report, but I firmly believe that it was a consistent approach across all districts across the nation to develop this information. And I got to tell you, the fact that you're seeing those statistics doesn't necessarily mean it's happening in Fort Smith, Arkansas. I represent some other districts, that have a much different circumstance. For example, I was in a district a few months ago, and they were letting go their LEA, so their head of a special ed, and outsourcing to the co-op, because they were losing so much enrollment that they had to cut $500,000 from their budget year over year. I mean, imagine having to have such declining enrollment that you're cutting and I'm talking about a 4A school, not even a 7A school, a 4A school having to cut $500,000 from its budget just 1 year to the next. So the legislature determined that school district boards of directors would benefit from having the conversation that we're having tonight. The plan is to strengthen the standards and procedures for preventing, reporting, investigating, and responding to incidents of bullying. And again, this is me talking, it's not the legislature, but I think the perspective is, you know, if we start a conversation at this level, then it will provide a lot more insight to give you the opportunity to ask a lot of piercing questions and try to get your arms around, you know, the issue of bullying and cyberbullying. Now here's where I don't completely track what the legislature is saying. So they, in their 8th conclusion that resulted in the adoption of this law, they talk about that fiscal responsibility requires Arkansas to take more effective and a clearer approach to eliminate school bullying. So I hear the word fiscal and I think that means they're going to throw some money at this. I haven't seen that law. So they say that the fiscal responsibility requires this action, and then they go on to talk about strengthening the standards and procedures and prevention, which I refer to those as unfunded mandates. In other words, they're giving you an assignment, but they're not necessarily giving you, money to execute it. I assume that's not unique to Arkansas. I assume that happens in all states, but it certainly does here. So, not surprisingly, the legislature tracked most of these conclusions from the Arkansas School Safety Commission's final report that was released in November of 2018. And I will tell you, and we'll talk about this a little more when we get to the end of the presentation, I expected more from this session as a result of the School Safety Commission's final report. What I really expected was a much more aggressive mandate that required districts to do a lot more to identify potential future school shooters and take action to eliminate them from the building. Virginia, Washington State, there are a lot of states out there that are out at the forefront of that right now and have cutting edge laws and teach certain protocols that are now being used around the nation by other states. In fact, we're doing a 50-state analysis right now to see what states have those mandates and which ones don't. Arkansas didn't follow through with that. But we were so concerned with Arkansas following through with it, not because it's a bad thing, but because of the circumstance it puts you in with respect to special education students, that we were even lobbying for change at the federal law level. We didn't make much traction with it, but it's still out there, and I'll share that with you in a few minutes. But again, back to the CDC, Arkansas has the highest national percentage of high school students who said they were bullied on campus and ranks 4th in the nation with respect to the percentage of students who were electronically bullied. This one's a little hard to read, but this law came out of recommendation number 2, which is all school districts should implement a positive climate program that deters bullying behaviors and, I can't even read it, promotes social emotional learning and positive peer relationships. You know, that's a beautiful statement, but I'm not sure exactly what it means. Yes?
Well, I was just going to share that Dr. Farrell is working diligently on recommendation 2, and we'll see some things in the coming, basically we're creating a new program to address this. And so we'll have more reports for you coming out within the next 2 to 3 months, I would think.
When we look at some of these numbers from the CDC, we're talking about, say, 20% or 26% of these kids have been subjected to bullying. It's not the other 80%. I mean, even when we go back into our disciplinary issues that we have in our district, it's just a handful of kids at Northside attributed for 50% of the suspensions. Just a handful, it's a handful of kids. So whenever I read something like this and we say, okay, well, we're going to promote this positive environment where we're going to wrap our arms around it, and we're talking about, 4 or 5 kids in a building that are just causing havoc. Yeah. We need to do a better job of figuring out who those kids are. And if they continue to disrupt our classrooms, we figure a way to move them out. I mean, to me, it's one of these things where you just encourage it.
Yeah, there's no question that when you talk about these percentages, it's not necessarily 1-to-1. I mean, a percent doesn't necessarily equal a child. You could be a frequent flyer.
I mean, you've got 20% of these kids saying that this is happening to them, and it's coming from these same sources.
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard it in my household from my son, who's 13 years old, and believe me, the kid that's doing it, you want to love him up. He's not just picking on one kid. He's picking on a whole wide array.
Well, I had a superintendent from another district call me today, and there was a run-in between a teacher and a student, and he told me this student was a frequent flyer and just a handful and very difficult to manage, and the student had been asked to come up to the front of the room to take his test, and he said, I can take my test from right here. And after a little more back and forth, the teacher went over and grabbed the desk and picked up the desk. The student goes on the floor. And now, of course, we have not just a student issue, we have a personnel issue that we're navigating.
The other thing that I thought about when you showed the law on how we need to use our fiscal, or to use our resources more appropriately, that one, I think, alludes to Act 190 that states that a school counselor shall spend at least 90% of his or her working time providing direct and indirect services to students. Mm-hmm. They're wanting to make sure that the counselors are used for counseling, and a lot of times they're pulled in a lot of different directions. So that's something that we're trying to wrap our arms around too. There's a lot to digest out of this legislative.
So here are the actual things that are new in 1029. What we're doing here requires the training and instruction, and not just for the board, but also for your certified staff. The good news for you is that they actually wrote into the law that the number of times you have to be trained is 1 time. Now, I suspect that's a rolling 1 time, so as board members leave and new board members come on board, I believe that new board members will have to receive the training. My expectation is that'll get picked up in the new board member training that's done annually by the ASBA. So 2 hours of professional development is required for your licensed personnel, to include bullying prevention and recognition of the relationship between incidents of bullying and the risk of suicide. Now here's the document that I was telling you did not exist as of press time today, and that is that the Department of Ed is actually supposed to develop professional development training in a new guidance document. And so, we're in September. The law was in effect as of the end of July, but that has not been prepared yet. Here are the things that the guidance document will have when it does come out. It's your obligations, the best practices for prevention, which I think still goes back to the positive climate and the things that your district is already out in front of and trying to develop. A clear definition of bullying that provides examples, and some of that is actually in the updated statute, includes most of that. And that guidance document has to be provided to all of your licensed personnel. So not only are they going to be trained, but they have to leave with a copy of the document.
And that won't impact us today.
Correct. I'm not going to read cyberbullying to you, but you can obviously see what the key components of it are. You're basically attempting to harass or intimidate or humiliate someone and potentially incite violence. So this is new. The investigation component of the law is something new. Must investigate, actually, that is the old. Okay, so here's the difference in the law. It did say investigate the complaint or report and make a record of the investigation and any action taken. The law now says if there's an incident of bullying, you must do these things. So before we just said investigate and report. Now, the district is required to report to the victim's parent, prepare a written report as soon as reasonably practicable, complete the investigation but not later than 5 days. That's new. Notify the parent or guardian of the student who is determined to have been the perpetrator upon completion of the investigation. I haven't completely have my head around that from the standpoint of the protection under FERPA for student records, but it does seem consistent to me because I do know that under FERPA, the videos in our buildings are protected. You know, no one off the street can come in and look at a video. But if my child is involved in an altercation, I'm allowed to come in and view that section of the video unredacted, even though it may show other students. So, you know, as I read this, I think that's consistent. But you can imagine the call from the district to the student that says, your student was bullied, and it was so-and-so's child. But that is now the requirement of the law. And then, you know, not only providing the record, but discussing the availability of counseling and other intervention services with all students involved, not just the student who has been bullied. Yes?
Is that point, is that you'll notify the parent of the person who is doing the bullying? What who determined the
Oh, okay. Good catch there. So I guess what that actually says, thank you. I guess what that actually says is you're reporting to the victim's parent, and then you're reporting to the perpetrator's parent. But Jeannie, good catch. I guess it doesn't actually say that you then also bridge.
So I will just know that my child has been bullied, and I can go to that child for information.
Yes.
The school's not going to do that.
Mm-hmm. That's probably right.
See, that has due process concern for me. Because if I'm being told I've done something, I have the right to defend myself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, not all, as you and I both know from handling domestic relation cases, not all allegations are true. Lots of time a parent will say, hey, the husband or the wife is doing X, Y, and Z when they're not. And so if you don't have the availability to defend yourself, I see that as a major problem.
You mean if you were going to report it to the other parent?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right. And of course, there is due process for the student who is accused if discipline is applied. Because if the student is suspended or expelled, there would be the right to appeal back through the channels and ultimately to the board.
I mean, this reeks a little bit to me of what's been going on in some of our universities over the last 8 years,
Mm-hmm.
which is unsubstantiated allegations against male students who have been just ceremoniously kicked out of school
Mm-hmm.
without the opportunity for due process.
Yeah.
I think that this is currently going on. he said, she said.
Right.
Or she said, if it's a bullying situation, or reverse. So and I think my next question would be, based on whatever the law is at completion, what's going to be reflected in the policy and procedure handbooks for the faculty if they do not comply with these standards? Because don't we have to then go and update those procedures properly?
Well, I think we're going to need some guidance from ADE as to what that's going to look like. And again, as Mr. Nye has said, we're probably the first district to open this dialogue about this, so it's just going to take some time.
Yeah, and I will tell you, one of the things, and it'll be interesting to see whether this comes from the ADE or the School Boards Association, but a good idea when doing these investigations and reports is to standardize it so that everybody's asking those same questions. And, you know, I worked for an employer one time that had HR directors who were all investigating employment misconduct in different ways, and so they actually developed a protocol, and it was in a red folder, so they called them Red Book investigations, and everybody knew what it was because everybody used the same language and everybody asked the same questions. And even before this, and not in the bullying session, but I've developed just for student misconduct a template of questions to ask that other districts are using when they're doing just disciplinary investigations that probably could be adapted to this. But you want your administrators all speaking the same language, and then if appeals come to you, you know, not that you want this many where you care that they're standardized, but it's good to have them all come in the same form, where your administrators are asking the same questions, checking the same boxes, you know, collecting the same pieces of evidence, because you're right, if all you get is he did it and no, I didn't, you have nothing to go on but credibility, and even then that's hard. And so having something to substantiate, and you know, in the employment setting all the time, employers determine that something is not substantiated, even if it happened, even if you know, you're sitting there, you think, okay, this happened, but somebody has to substantiate that it happens, and if you can't get it substantiated, you know, then it's hard to take action. So, you know, developing those protocols, I think, will be important as we go through this process.
I don't think that there's too much of a surprise when a lot of these issues come up, because it tends to be the same people. It's not just this broad base of kids out bullying each other. I mean, you can go to any school in this district and you can sit down and you can talk to any principal, and she can tell you, or he can tell you, where his problems are, where those problems are at. You know?
So Wade, and I agree with you. I would tell you where I see the exception in my day-to-day is with what we'll refer to as the cyberbullying, because, you know, when we email, you know, messages can be so misinterpreted because you can't pick up on tone or expression. You don't know, you know, what other, you know, baggage, you know, is on somebody's mind.
I mean, you're seeing kids on Twitter,
Yeah.
you know, and you're talking about a football rivalry.
Right.
I mean, to me, you know, I've got kids in high school, and I'm looking at some of these tweets, and I'm looking at my daughter, like, look, this is, I know you find 17 years old, you find the humor in it. I'm 44 years old, I don't find the humor in it. And you can see where that line is, so it's good-natured fun. You know, where is that? Where's that line set?
Yeah, I saw one recently where literally there was no message, but a student just texted in response to something that had been said to him, sends back a picture of Hitler. No message, nothing. But it was interpreted very severely by the receiving student. And I don't really know anything more about that, but cyberbullying in particular, it seems to be a slippery slope for a lot of students. Your best students, your worst students, your well-behaved, your bad-behaved. It seems to be equal opportunity violation for people.
Freedom of speech is a
That's
heavy
right,
thing.
yeah.
I like the last one that you just skipped over, that
Mhm.
one there, the reporting to the board.
Yes.
I like that.
Yeah, and so that's, that's an annual requirement now. And so, and what you're going to see, of course, is the statistics are going to be reported back out, and you're going to see how your district, this requires significant internal training too, because what you find is that, it's what they say, garbage in, garbage out. If you're reporting something as bullying that's not bullying, well, it becomes bullying in your statistic. Or if you're not classifying something as bullying that was, again, it artificially impacts your statistics. And this happens, across all kinds of reporting to the ADE across all the districts.
So will the superintendents and Dr. Rebecca get together on a standardized way for reporting this? Because I could see a district saying our bullying statistics are the best because we have low issues. Is there a way to get the superintendents on the same page?
Yeah, I think that it probably will be like some of our other state reports that we have to file, that there'll be some critical attributes or elements that we'll have to have, and then we'll just end up. It'll be interesting to me to see if the ADE requires a report or if we're just given, like if they'll send a form or if we'll have our own that has to include certain data points. So, and I don't know, and there'll be categories, I suppose, for actions taken and how that will work. So it'll be interesting to see how it unfolds. I expect there'll be a lot of dialogue among superintendents and people who, in student services, leaders about how to address that.
Honesty is really important. Well, it's all, of course it's all important, but this is one of those things that districts don't want to admit to. They don't. They don't want to come out to the public and admit where those problems lie.
How much responsibility do we have if someone is cyberbullying a student after hours?
I know Greg will have an opinion on this.
I'm sorry?
I said, I know Greg will have an opinion on this. So it comes, the standard really comes down to whether it's intended or actually has some impact back at school in what I would call the broader educational environment. If it is calculated to have a substantial impact on the educational environment, or if it's a true threat, then there can be some responsibility. But it all gets back to the balancing of First Amendment, and again, whether you're using if they're using a district issued Chromebook, that would matter. So it really matters what the intent is, what the impact is, and what the device is. And you're going to look at all of those things to make that judgment.
Would that be true whether it be from like north side to south side, or from south side to Greenwood?
If you're on school property, and bullying another student in your district. Now, great question about whether it would impact if I'm going cross district, but my guess is that the other district is not going to have any jurisdiction over our students. I guess if it is our student and engaging in conduct while we have that student, and they're on campus, I suspect you could take action no matter who, if they're, texting Senator Bozeman. It doesn't matter if they're doing it. I suspect there would be some responsibility you could enforce when they're on our property and during our hours, and when we're charged with the responsibility of their conduct and safekeeping. So requirements of the new school board policy, in particular, having, report be as soon as possible, providing the notice annually, and also to legal guardians. We have to make sure it's posted on the website, also in the student handbook. Have to diligently describe.
So there's mandatory reporting that there used to be? Is there penalties for the teacher if they don't?
If they don't report it? I don't view all aspects of student-to-student cyberbullying, for example, as a mandatory report under the Department of Human Services. I think we're talking about reporting internally for us to investigate and address. We will have to describe the procedures. I will tell you an interim step while we're coming out with the new policy, and I don't want to get out in front of myself, but I think you're going to have some revised policies in front of you in October to capture some of the changes that became effective in the end of July. And this will be one of them. As an interim step describing what all of the procedures are, Darren Lace has already kind of issued what the procedures are out of the law and distributed essentially what came right out of the statute to all the building administrators, so they know what the law requires from an investigation standpoint, and so that you're in compliance while everything is, catching up and being developed. And, as we always talk about, law trumps policy, policy trumps procedures, procedures trump practices. So at any time, if you're behind in any one of them, you ultimately look all the way up to the statute to see what the requirement is. So again, we have to do the notice in 2 places for sure, the handbook. I think I already covered this actually. And on the website in the publication, it has to set forth the comprehensive rules, procedures, and standards of conduct within the district. Yet another new requirement is that we annually reevaluate the bullying laws. Now, the law already requires that you annually review your disciplinary policies. So adding this to the mix, I would expect it would largely be that same focus group that would look at this, and it makes sense that you would include this and do it at the same time you're looking at your disciplinary policy. Again, I'm not going to read these, but the statute very clearly defines what bullying is, and I would point out 2 and 4 in particular, the substantial interference with a student's education or with a public and school employee's role in education. Again, 4 is substantial disruption of the orderly operation of the public school or educational environment. And so I guess an example under 2, so I'm sitting at home and I'm snapping, or I don't have a Snapchat, but I think that's what you call it. I'm snapping my fellow student and I make a true threat about, if you get off that bus tomorrow and you walk into Miss White's classroom, let me just tell you what's going to happen. And so that student reports it, is afraid to come to school. A lot of things happen as a result of that. That could be an example of cyberbullying where I'm not at school, I might not be on a school device, but it is my intent to keep that student out of the classroom so that that student cannot receive an education on Tuesday or maybe even Wednesday, and it has that impact, or it's at least reasonably foreseeable it's going to have that impact. That could be an example where you might hold a student accountable for cyberbullying even though that student is not on campus. 4 is kind of the broader general definition where it's having an impact generally on the educational environment. I may have shared this example with you all before, but I had a situation where student A sent an Instagram post or did something and said, hey, don't go in the North Hall tomorrow, there will be a bomb behind the Coke machine. And the student who received it showed his parents, who then called the district and told enough other people that it became significant of whether or not students were concerned about going to school the next day because they didn't know whether there's going to be a bomb behind the Coke machine. And it was not sent with malice. It was the student didn't pass the intelligence test when he sent it, but he didn't really mean I'm going to go blow up the school. And I don't know that would necessarily end up being something that would fall within bullying, but it likely would be a disciplinary issue because it caused substantial disruption in the orderly operation of the public school or educational environment. Cyberbullying, similar, but it's through an electronic act. We just have to say electronic acts now because we can't keep up with all the different platforms. You know, as soon as this group gets on a platform, then the kids find a new one so that we're not all on the same one. Although my kids said, Dad, I don't want you on Instagram, and I actually never got on Instagram. I'm on virtually no social media. Again, harassment, pattern of unwelcome verbal or physical conduct. I think you know most of these definitions, but it's a good refresher to review them. You know, this one is more significant. The substantial disruption means, and that's really good lawyer language. Lawyers like to say without limitation so we don't get boxed in on what it really means. But if it causes a necessary cessation of instruction or educational activities, takes away the focus in the building, requires severe repetitive disciplinary measures to control the classroom, and the other behaviors that substantially interfere with the learning environment. Now, when it comes to First Amendment, it's not just that there is a substantial disruption, but the standard is it reasonably foreseeable that there will be a substantial disruption to the educational environment? And I'll show you some examples of that in a few minutes. So current policy is the ASBA model policy. The new one that will be coming out will be based squarely on the law that became effective in July. And I was here in the district a couple of weeks ago, and Darren and Terry and I sat down and we went through every one of these student policies. And I will tell you that's a really high level of commitment from your administrators, because I can tell you that generally speaking, the majority of districts that I review policies for, if I just go out and look at a district website and look at their policies, you're going to see the ASBA policies with no amendments, with all of the annotations and footnotes still in them. Even the ones that say pick A or B, it still says pick A or B. And it's kind of like, you know, when you get sworn in and it's like, I, state your name. You see that a lot, and it takes a high level of commitment to do these things, because again, we're talking about changes to 118 policies, 4 new policies, and you're right now just catching up because you had some old legacy policies that were in place, you know, for decades. Some legacy policies that were in effect when several people in this room were still in the district. So, you know, I know one thing that I think it was Mike Poore did when he became the superintendent of Little Rock Schools, is he just went in and wholesale adopted kind of the same thing, ASBA policies with no changes, just to get rid of the legacy policies and bring them up to standard, and then started working through them. But what you find out is that even the ASBA policies, even though they are the very best that I think is out there as an opportunity for the district, because they have so many lawyers devoted to tracking the legislation and keeping the policies up to date, there are mistakes in the policies. There are legal mistakes, There are typographical errors, there are changes in font and tints and different things because different people work on the policies. And so the best practice truly is, I think, what this district is signed on to, which is let's have those standardized policies, but let's keep legacy policies that are important to us, and then let's make sure that they are legally sound and fit our needs. But it does take a lot of work. Again, this is just more of our current policy, and there's nothing particularly instructive from this, especially since we'll be moving to a new one probably in about 30 days. But this bullying investigation procedures, this is what Darren sent out district-wide so that all the buildings understood what their obligations would be under the law to bridge the gap between the end of the last session and the new policies that will be coming our way. And this is right out of the statute.
That's a question for Dr. Brubaker. It says, sure can. It says building principal or designee. Are we planning on leaving it at the administrative level and not moving it to our police officers?
Right, that would be right. These are functions of the administrators.
Okay.
And so when it says building principal or designee, we mean either principal or
assistant. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page because that would be my preference. Thank you.
Not to spend too much time on it, but there is overlap between these requirements and other laws and policies. For example, we have a sexual harassment policy that prohibits conduct for the purpose or effect of substantially and unreasonably interfering with an individual's education. A similar circumstance, so we do have overlap between other policies and laws. Again, that prohibits behavior designed to taunt, degrade, or ridicule, distribute inappropriate explicit images electronically, hazing. And there are more resources out there, and I suspect the district and the ADA and the School Boards Association will all be looking at it. This is on the ADA, actually, their webpage designed for anti-bullying. You can see this is what it looks like if you go to their site, and they provide other resources there. This is hard to read, but these are all links to other resources that exist to try to get our arms around this issue. StopBullying.gov has a lot of interesting information on it for the prevention of bullying. This one, to me, actually stuck out. I read this slide many times before coming in here to talk about it tonight, but it is on stopbullying.gov. One of the opinions that they share is that zero tolerance and 3-strike policies actually can be counterintuitive, may do more harm than good, according to them, and that in fact it may discourage reporting because peers and administrators don't want a student to be removed from the building so they get a pass, or they try to manage it themselves. And so that really gets back to, I think, part of what you've seen in this new statute, trying to get to the environment as opposed to the punishment. And again, it's never one size fits all. But this one caught my attention because I would have come from the school of thought that harsh is better.
Yeah, I don't believe it.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, here's a little more about the concern of short-term approaches. You can see the highlighted language. This is very similar to what we saw in the new statute that has been passed by our legislature. Here are some interesting, I won't call them statistics, some of them are. Kids who are bullied can experience negative physical, school, and mental health issues. They are more likely to experience depression and anxiety, increased feelings of sadness and loneliness, changes in sleep and eating patterns, loss of interest in activities they used to enjoy, can persist into adulthood. And think back to those CDC statistics. We were number 1 in bullying, number 4 in cyberbullying, and then we ranked number 1 or 2 in a lot of those categories that I would fit into that first bullet point. They have health complaints, decreased academic achievement and school participation. Read the last one. A very small number of bullied children might retaliate through extremely violent measures in 12 of 15 school shootings since the 1990s. 12 of the 15, all but 3, had a history of being bullied. Yes.
One of the last actual bullet about the decrease, one of the things that I personally felt was an issue in our district was transferring between schools. Why some of the students choose to transfer from school to school, and the parents not self-disclosing some of that information because they have the option to not state why the child. So again, people are not reporting it for fear of retaliation of their kids in schools. So if we create an environment, let them know that we've been trained, the schools are being trained. It's almost like we need to have everybody hold everyone accountable. And that way we can all stay on our toes, because if it's for the kids, I don't like the numbers of bullying. I recall situations of kids that were being bullied when I was in school, and how some of those folks won't even come to class reunions because of it. So it's a huge impact. So this is huge for me, because it really goes into the wellness impact for our longevity. And health and hopelessness, or hopelessness, is one of those features that the city of Fort Smith has had an issue with. So we can help that by what we do here.
I think there's another reason why parents don't report, and it's because of fear of stigmatizing their child. And they want the student to have a normal experience, and so it just gets buried.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm dealing with it right now. He doesn't. I mean, it's crazy. It's like I don't want to be in trouble. Why not?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Here are attributes of the students who bully. Also engage in violent and other risky behaviors into adulthood. More likely to abuse alcohol and other drugs in adolescence and as adults. Get into fights, vandalize property. Criminal convictions, traffic citations. Abusive towards romantic partners, spouses, or children as adults. This one, again, was another one that was interesting to me. The impact on bystanders, kind of like secondhand smoke. The impact on those who are sitting on the sideline watching it. Increased use of tobacco, alcohol, and other drugs. Increased mental health problems, miss or skip school. And I mean, I'll admit, I wouldn't have even thought about this category. All right, so here, this is really gets more into discipline and kind of the impact of special ed and First Amendment when you get into disciplinary issues. So here's the general rule. and that is that school officials cannot constitutionally reach out and discover, monitor, or punish any type of out-of-school speech. It's called the Greg Magnus Rule. Yeah.
2011.
That's right.
You know, I know it sounds crazy, but it's bullying. Sometimes it takes a bully to be a bully. They've been bullied,
Mm-hmm.
so they learn from the best, and so they turn around and retaliate.
And I don't.
Think it makes sense?
Yes, and I also don't, and you all probably have more perspective because you're closer to it right now, but I don't know whether the larger problem today is cyberbullying versus actual, but I suspect it is. You know, it's a lot easier to have the poison pen and have the safety of your device between you and another person, and it can be so impactful when you see how these kids are just, they.
It's the plot. It's the plot.
Yeah.
It's the scheme. It's the group text. It's cutting people out of the group text. It's the meanness and the pettiness, and it's not even so much the spoken word. It's what it's. From where we sit, I don't know how you would get your arms around that. But
Well, you're right. It's conduct as much as it is speech.
I think it's the same thing that occurred pre technology, but you can use the same tactics with technology, not inviting you to the game or the room. Now you can just eliminate that person, like you said, in group text. It's the same thing. You just have more options to perpetuate that type of behavior.
you reach out to more people.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Easily. Versus, let's write notes and get everybody
You
together.
got
You
four
got
kids.
your cell
Instead of
phone.
having 4 kids going at it, now you got 40, and just.
I think it escalates based on age too, and use.
I think
phones.
about technology being a tool, and we talk about how technology enables us to do so much more efficiently and powerfully and quickly, and it can be used for good, and it can be used for bad things too.
Yeah.
And so it's an accelerant and
Accelerant, that's a good
yeah,
one.
and an amplifier.
There's just so much,
Accelerate.
there's only so much we can, the 7 of us, or everyone in this room, there's only so much we can do. And we just have to figure out a way to make our schools a safer place. I mean, the kind of place that the kids want to wake up in the morning and they want to go to class. They're not scared of the kids sitting behind them. They're not worried about what's going to happen at lunch. We can only protect them so far, but we have to be able to do everything in our power, what's realistically in our power. And in all honesty, I'm sure every district may be a little different. We are so slow to really identify these kids that are causing the problems and deal with them, and to deal with them in harsh terms. We spend a lot of time dancing around the subject. Studies this and reports that. The bottom line is you got kids that are out there that are truly disruptive, and they are having a negative impact in our classrooms. And we have to have the courage to stand up and pull them out of the classrooms. And what that means from there, I don't know. But that's what we can do. We can't change the world.
So here are the two, when it comes to speech, here, and you've heard me mention both of these before, but these are the exceptions to the First Amendment when you can take action and discipline. And both of these are defined terms from case law, and that's why you see them in quotes. One is a true threat, and the other is the substantial disruption. This gives a little more definition to it. So a true threat is a statement that a reasonable recipient would have interpreted as a serious expression of an intent to harm or cause injury to another. And so if a student on or off campus makes a true threat, their remarks are not protected by the First Amendment. Discipline for remarks amounting to a true threat does not violate an individual's First Amendment rights. There's, of course, more to understanding the full definition to it. It's all of these factors. You'll see, for example, here we're citing to the Eighth Circuit, and that's because it's the Federal Court of Appeals that hears cases out of Arkansas. And so it's the reaction of the recipient and of other listeners, whether the threat was conditional. That's actually a pretty important one. I had one come to me when a student had been caught with marijuana on campus. She met with the SRO. She got very agitated and angry, shouted profanities to him, and then when she left, she sent a social media message to a friend, described what happened, and she said, "I could just kill that SRO. I could just kill that SRO." And in this district, when students are recommended for expulsion, they usually have the opportunity to attend the ALE in lieu of expulsion. But there are exceptions, and that is if the student is perceived to be a threat to the population at the ALE, because the theory, and I think rightfully so, is, even the kids at the ALE ought to have a safe environment. And so the way it has been interpreted in this district is, for example, if you get caught with marijuana, you probably can go to the ALE in lieu of expulsion. But if you're on campus selling the marijuana, you're not going to be let in because you're the dealer, not the user. So here, the question is, did she make a threat of physical violence? Stated another way, was it a true threat? And so the board had to decide, do we let this student go to ALE or not, under the determination of, was this really a threat? What do y'all think? Was that a threat? No. Yeah. Under the case law, it would not be a threat because it was not I'm going to, it was I could. Mm-hmm. The other factors, whether they've made it before to the victim, and whether the victim had reason to believe. Again, this is, if she had communicated, that's right. But, and this isn't all-inclusive, it can be any or all. But she was just mad. She was sounding off. But these are fairly, it can be a closer call than that one. And these can be, I put the bomb behind the Coke machine. True threat? Well, it was made, you go back through all of these, it's hard to know.
Well, no, that's pretty true. Somebody told me they put a bomb behind her.
Yeah. Yeah, but what if it was someone that is you just know to be a jokester, always saying inappropriate things, never serious about it, wouldn't hurt a fly? It gets back to
Telling jokes outside of the Portsmouth Public Schools.
yes, that's right. All right, so here's an actual case example. Now, you know that it's an older case when we're talking about writing on a piece of paper, by the way. The older cases, they were writing on pieces of paper and they were handing notes. The new cases are all social media. So, is this a true threat or do we give this student a book deal?
What happened to those other two truckers?
ask you something. So, I mean, a lot of the stuff that we're talking about when it comes to terroristic threatening, that's a crime. I don't
Yes.
understand why if you threaten to physically harm someone at the home,
Yes.
you get arrested. I mean, you get arrested and you get charged and you have a criminal record. I don't understand why. If you come to school somehow I mean, these people are committing crimes, terroristic threatening. Why are we not arresting them? Why are they not being booked with crimes? If
If it is terroristic threatening, then all of that can be and should be true. I will tell you, because we, in another district, everything was being categorized as terroristic threatening. Any threat was being characterized as terroristic threatening. And when you go and pull the criminal code and you read the definition of terroristic threatening, it's not like you and I would think, 4 words describes it. It's a definition about this long, and it includes intent to harm in addition to the statement of harm, how it was interpreted, whether you had the means to carry it out. It has all of these aspects to it. It's not me just saying, I'm going to beat you up, or I'm going to take a shot. So on this one, what do we think? Protected First Amendment, or
This was a student assignment to write an essay?
to write an essay in English, not necessarily a graphic essay saying that he planned to kill the teacher.
Well, but you could argue that this student just has a vivid imagination and has watched a lot of
That's right.
movies that, and they really enjoy that genre. So, I don't know.
Here you go. And here's what I would tell you about this. Judges are no different than anybody in this room, and they're trying to make these same judgment calls, which if you polled people would line up and say protected First Amendment, other people would say not protected First Amendment, it's a true threat, or that it's going to cause some kind of substantial disruption. All right. How about this one? What do we think? Give him a comic book deal, or kick him out of school for making a threat?
It's funny, when I read the other one, I immediately thought about art.
Mm-hmm.
So to see this one come up next,
Yes.
because again, based on what Jeannie said, to me it depends on the intent.
Mm-hmm.
If this was something described by the faculty, that this was something that they needed to come up with, was this Bulldog Death of the Week a tradition? Or what was it? Anytime I see things like that, whether it was with the first item or this one, as a teacher, I would hope that the student would be pulled aside to discuss that before immediately going and then discussing with the parents what the escalation process should be. So I don't even see how these are making it to court.
Well, and so the way when we get, I've got 2 more that I'm going to share with you, and I'll give you the scenario of how they're getting to court. So this one found that there was no true threat, did not cause substantial disruption, did not suggest that the speaker intended to shoot anyone, nor reasonably interpreted. And when the courts use that language, reasonably interpreted, so, there's the reaction individually you have, but when they start throwing around the reasonably interpreted, that means they're going to apply logic that most people would react this way. Most reasonable people would react this way or that way. But anyways, you can see, so Western District of Arkansas, so that case, would have been heard over here in Fort Smith or up in Fayetteville. All right, so then the other exception is the substantial disruption exception. And whether it is reasonably foreseeable that the speech or expression by the student would cause school officials to reasonably anticipate substantial disruption of or material interference with the work of the school. And that's really a more extensive definition of what we're really talking about back in bullying. That's just fleshed out a little more. All right. Does anybody know about this case? This was a very recent case from Huntsville School District. So 2018. Student posts a picture of himself holding an assault rifle, no words. He's wearing a trench coat and a hat, and the police were called. Were the police right? By the way, Dad was sitting right next to him on the couch as he was saying, "Look, Dad, I'm going to post this picture holding an assault rifle out on my social media."
I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that was ridiculous.
Yes.
I can't believe that the police showed up and actually made
Well,
an issue out of that.
So I'll add a couple more facts. So he sends the picture out, and all the buddies pile on and start putting school shooting motifs and different things on the picture. And it stayed up several other postings and ultimately got taken down. So he was, I don't remember what my next slide. Okay, here we go. So he was suspended from school for 10 days for terroristic threatening with a recommendation for expulsion for a year. He was then expelled. Then he filed his lawsuit saying that his First Amendment and due process rights were violated. So that's where we get back to how did these cases come up? It's because the kid gets disciplined and the parents file suit. And so the parents asked for a preliminary injunction for the student to get back in school. Anybody know what the ruling was?
Probably back in school.
I would hope they would put him back in school.
Back in school, back in school, back in school, back in school.
I don't know, but I can tell you who was the judge.
It was Tim Brooks.
I couldn't say, I won't say.
All right.
He was depicting a picture from 1920s.
But he's an
The picture was not, he says he was emulating that, but he was holding an actual assault rifle wearing a trench coat.
But the other students added them.
Yes, but the other students, and I don't even know what happened to the other students, by the way, because to my knowledge, no other lawsuit was filed. Yes.
There has to be more to this, or they would not, they suspended him this.
Who was the judge?
Well, I know it's Tim Brooks, but how did it come out?
So he did determine it was not a threat, but it freaked out enough people
I agree.
that students were held home, parents were calling, it took the time of the teachers and the administrators, and so he denied the injunction. Now that, by the way, does not mean that the student ultimately wouldn't have won. It means that based on the evidence that came before him in court that day, he believed that the district had a substantial likelihood of success in proving substantial disruption, or at least that it was foreseeable. Now what happened is, and that case has settled. It did not go to trial, and the district paid money. Now, I don't know, I don't remember if the amount was published or not. I have in my head, for some reason, $70,000 or $80,000. and I believe it was all paid by insurance. And so I expect that at some point, as insurance companies do, they decided they would rather, pay the cost of defense for a trial.
If they know they're gonna lose.
Yeah. Or if they know that they're going to incur the cost of defense, or if they know that.
I've seen them fight over $500.
A lot of times, though.
I've seen them spend $10,000 not to pay $500.
Yeah.
$500 just to set a precedent.
Yes, they will do that. But they'll also sometimes pay the cost of defense just because they know they're paying that amount no matter what. A lot of lawyers count on defense cost settlements.
I look at loss reserves every day.
Yes, yes, yep.
I'm reading on a campus safety website, and this may be or may not be correct, but it says that the Huntsville School District agreed to pay $42,665 to settle the lawsuit.
That sounds right. That sounds right. Well, the lawyer probably got 50%. Yes. By the way, I'm going to trial in December for a district who banned banned a parent for berating coaches and referees at a basketball game and making some other threats. Same court, same judge. I was not the lawyer of the district when the case came about, but I'm trying the case now. It's a First Amendment case. The district. All right, here's another case.
So I can't recommend that the referee go get glasses, or is that correct?
Yeah, I think you'll be okay with that one.
I just want to.
So look, this one's in Rogers. So this is obviously not a threat case. This is a substantial disruption case. The funny thing about this fact pattern is when I've done this slide to teachers and administrators, I've actually had a question from the audience multiple times asking, what can you do when you have this fact pattern, because it's happened to so many people in so many districts. Something like this, not exactly. So what do we think? Is this going to cause a substantial disruption? We got one yes, a maybe.
I wouldn't say, I think it would be a disruption, but not substantial.
Well, was it factually true?
I don't think so. Yeah, I think the answer is no, it was not factually true. I actually don't recall, but I think it is not factually true. I've used this slide for a couple of years. Disruption? All right. Protected First Amendment speech did not amount to a substantial disruption. So what was interesting is I had a teacher tell me that this exact same thing happened to her. She was talking to me from the audience, said this exact same thing happened to her, and she said that she called the student in, talked to him about it, did not punish him for the act, but while he was in her room, he was insubordinate and disrespectful, so she punished him for that. All right, so things get a lot more complicated if you've got a student who receives special education. I'll actually, this one, have y'all heard of the Valonia case? Okay, this is a case still pending in federal court in Little Rock right now. This all happened in Valonia. I can't do justice to it paraphrasing it, so I'll let you read this one for a minute. And imagine this coming to your district administration and having to deal with this. And the other facts that I will tell you on this student is that he was 90% in general education. 90% general education placement. He had some reading recovery or something, 10% special ed, which gives him all of the protections of the IDEA. So the district suspended him for 10 days with a recommendation for expulsion. And within a week, the parents filed a due process complaint. The magic of a due process complaint is under federal law, what happens immediately is something called stay put, meaning the student goes back to his last placement before the expulsion. So it goes back to school. By law, goes back to school. So Valonia went to federal court trying to get a TRO to keep the student out of the building. And the court actually did place the student on a homebound setting, pending the outcome of the due process hearing, which was on an expedited track and went forward and was tried to the hearing officer. The hearing officer sided with the family. The hearing officer was not a lawyer, by the way. Hearing officer sided with the family and ordered the student back to school. You imagine bringing that student back into your campus. Oh, I said it wrong. He was 98% in general ed setting, only 2% special ed. And then what happens is, so then the district refused to welcome the student back into the district. And so a contempt motion was filed with the federal court, and the federal court ordered that the student go back to the district. And it's because this third bullet, when a state-appointed hearing officer rules in a due process case, that becomes the new stay put. And of course, what he ruled is go back to the 2017 IEP, which was 98% general education. Now, that was in March of 2018. March of 2018. We are in September of 2019. We still do not have a ruling, and this isn't my case. There still is no ruling in this case. Still no ruling. And what happens is the court has to rule whether the hearing officer was right or wrong. And until the court rules whether the hearing officer was right or wrong, the hearing officer's order stays in place. And so from March of 18, now we're in September of 19, and there still is no ruling. Now, I actually do believe, and I only know this secondhand, I believe they agreed to extend the homebound placement for the student, but that's not a requirement. The parents could have required that he go back into the school building, even with all of those things that we read. And that's where all of these things get very, very dicey for the district. And I will tell you that your all special ed department and Kathy Hauser just rocked the house. I'm telling you that the engagement that I have with them versus other districts is a few percent in comparison. They just are so good. They are so good.
This homebound placement, who teaches?
The district. District still has to send in, and yeah, now, and homebound doesn't necessarily mean in the home. The way homebound instruction can be delivered can be in a public library, a community center, could be. And now, the way the law is now, even a student that's expelled, you're still providing services. And so whether you're providing services under Child Find and the IEP or through a homebound placement isn't necessarily that different. And so, this is where we are when we're talking about, managing violence with special education students. You're trying to balance between the safety of the entire district and the rights of the one. So there are three what are called special circumstances where you can unilaterally change the placement of a student on an IEP: weapons, drugs, and infliction of serious bodily injury. That's it. And it's only up to 45 days. But a district, if a student brings a weapon, brings drugs, or inflicts serious bodily injury at school, the district can move the student to a homebound placement or a more restrictive placement unilaterally for up to 45 days. Serious bodily injury, look at this definition though. So when your teacher suffers a severe bite through clothing that tears skin and draws blood, that's called a workers' comp injury. It is not serious bodily injury that results in the ability to change the placement of a student.
It's not battery.
Well, it can be, but the first thing you do before you take a disciplinary action against a student on an IEP is you have to, if it's more than a 10-day suspension, you have to perform what's called a manifestation determination review. And the teachers and the other service providers all have to come in, and they have to determine whether or not the conduct is a manifestation of the student's disability. And if it is, the student stays. If it's not, then you can discipline.
I
Yeah,
get that part.
yeah.
Why can you not?
Oh, you could,
Have them arrested.
yeah.
And take them to jail.
There is always the privilege for doing that, and the case law is actually very favorable on that. I've gone to these due process hearings where the complaint was that the district was actually trying to do an end around to avoid the procedural protections of the IDEA by sending the kid to jail. But you always have the privilege of calling law enforcement.
I mean, I can't go to the mall and I can't go to the mall
Right.
and get into an argument with someone and then bite them.
That's right.
And not expect to end up in handcuffs and in jail.
But what happens is then it goes to the juvenile judge. The juvenile judge is looking at a kid on an IEP that had a temper tantrum and bit a teacher versus all of the other things on that judge's docket, and I can tell you what the result's going to be. It's going to be a pretty soft consequence. In fact, it'll probably be resolved with the prosecutor before it ever even gets heard.
Well, we need to protect our teachers. Yeah. That's the number one thing.
So you can see this one, read this one. This did not rise to the level of substantial bodily injury. And by the way, these things happen. I can't tell you one of these from here, but these things happen here. They happen in every district. In every district. Yes. There you go.
Here in the district.
And this is what concerns our teachers.
Yes.
I mean, they're I respect the rights of the teachers and the parents. Our teachers are not punching bags.
Right. Here's one similar. The student suffered a concussion. What's interesting to me about this case is I would tell you that if this had been a teacher as opposed to a student, I suspect the court would have determined that this was not substantial bodily injury. I think that the fact that it happened to another student likely favored the decision here. So recommendation number 4 in the final school safety report was that school districts should establish a behavioral threat assessment team and process. It references some of these protocols. This one is not law yet. This is the one that I thought was going to be leading what came out of the School Safety Commission final report. I suspect this one would also be one of the more expensive ones to execute. But when
Have enough mental health providers
No.
in our area to go forward with something like that.
The other thing is too, before I read this slide, that I would tell you is that, I talked about guns and drugs and harm. So threat of weapons, threat of harm, and threat of drugs doesn't get you anywhere. And so all you can do right now under the law is you can seek parent agreement for the change of placement. That one doesn't work a whole lot. A lot of times in these instances, the parents are looking for the district to solve for this. The district can just make the decision and send a notice of action and then wait to receive a due process and defend its position. The district can file its own due process and seek a determination that there ought to be a change of placement because of safety. They can suspend for up to 10 days. There's the Wade rule, number 5. Report criminal activity to the police. And of course this one, behavior intervention plan. I've not had a case yet where the position that I'm defending is that there's an expert testifying that a properly drafted, properly applied behavior plan works 100 times out of 100. Our federal judges don't completely buy into that, fortunately. But here's the problem with all those things that we just looked at. None of them are immediate. And so if you are trying to decide, what do I do today to protect the safety of my students, none of those things are immediate. And in fact, even the one where you seek an expedited hearing, as soon as you file that due process, stay put is implicated. You're in stay put, which means the student stays exactly where he or she is. And so, what I think needs to happen, and this is just the law according to Marshall, is that there needs to be a 4th special circumstance added to the federal law, and that's this one. If you identify a student as an imminent threat to cause serious bodily injury, you can invoke that 45-day cooling off period. I've had some fairly serious engagement with some other school superintendents, with our federal legislators, and there's interest, but I don't see this happening anytime soon. Some other things that need to happen is we need to, get a lot more transparency when we're getting students, because you have students coming into the district all the time and you don't know what their history is. And so we certainly need more transparency and more transparency with our juvenile justice system. And that's my presentation.
I had a statement. I had a special ed kid in Howard School who hit me, hit at me. He didn't hit me, but he kicked me. And I thought I had him arrested.
And you can.
I did.
Yes.
Yeah. And we went to court. And he told the judge that the reason he had been in school in Little Rock as a special school for kids, his mom wanted him back in town because she wanted a new Cadillac. And so she took the money and bought her white. She did bought her white Cadillac. I'm not sure it was from this money. But anyway, she moved him to another school. So see, then it was in fourth grade, I was German, I was going to, at the time he kicked me, I was going to give him a karate chop, but I saved him.
Well, you could have gotten away with it.
I dealt with, so you talk about fourth grade. So I had dealt with the situation with the sixth grader where he had a manila envelope, and he had, I don't know, 8 or 10 pieces of paper in there. And the first page, he described that he wanted to kill this fellow student. The second page, he described everyone who was going to help him do it. The third page, he described what role everybody would take, the first one being acquiring chloroform, the second coming behind the locker and grabbing the girl and putting the chloroform over her mouth, the next dragging her out into the woods, who was going to be behind what tree with what weapon, where they were going to get the weapon, which was from his house because his dad had a weapon. Then the next page was a diagram of showing almost to scale where all of the trees were, where everybody was going to stand and who was going to do what. The next was some gibberish about what his rights were under some United Nations treaty.
How old was he?
Sixth grade. Wow. And then finally he had new dollar bills equal to the amount he had estimated to be the cost of the chloroform. And so he was expelled. As soon as he was expelled, the parents claimed that he should be receiving services, special education services, that the district failed under its child find requirements, and that they should have identified him as a student with disabilities, and that it was all the district's fault. We did interpret it as a referral and did have him evaluated. He did not qualify for special education. He was expelled, and he was expelled for a year. And the amazing thing is, we're 3 or 4 years later, and he's been back in the district ever since, and no issues.
Spooky though.
Yeah.
We lost him. When I was here, I guess, was 16, one of my classmates moved, and we all know him really well, moved to Florida. He came back one day, came to football practice, and played football with us. And we all thought, oh, he's moving back here. He's like, no, I'm just here to visit. And what he had done is he'd killed both his parents, bathed them, put them to bed, and then collected these weapons, came to Southside, and was looking for, he had 4 or 5 individuals that he intended to settle up with. And all of it was, when it came out, it was all over some perceived slight over a girl from 2 years prior. He was disturbed, to say the least, and he's still in prison. But what happens though is that, it's not always the things that you hear about in the news. It's the things that we're able to stop. I mean, and the reason he was stopped, and the reason that we didn't have a tragedy here in Fort Smith was because one of his friends came to school and said, you got to do something quick. This is what he's going to do. And they were able to get to it, and sure enough, they looked in Florida. There are his parents. And it was as serious as a heart attack. And what bothers me is when we know these threats exist, we know they're there, and our hands are tied. And then we're looking at these parents, and we're looking at people that are trusting us with their kids every day, and we know, don't know for certain, but we've got a good idea where these threats are coming from, and we can't address them.
Well, without getting too deep in the weeds we do have threat assessment protocols that we use, the things that are recommended by the Governor's Commission. And I will tell you this, that if someone wants to sue us because we're protecting our kids, go right on ahead.
That's right.
That's all I have. Anything else, anything I can answer, or?
Well, yeah.
Thank you.
very good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Mhm.
Well, it makes us proud of our district. It makes me very proud of our district.
Yeah,
I think we're a safe, secure district.
Yeah, we're
absolutely.
Right. Mr. Hainsworth will be able to watch this at another time. I think it also helps to illustrate the importance of the specialty of school law, and when you start talking about manifestation hearings and whatever the most recent court case is, and also our model policy process and what we're trying to do there to take a look at what's recommended, but also to look at what we do in our district and try to mesh the two so that we get it right.
Well, it's also really a good opportunity to remind us what we need to be discussing with our state reps about and our state senators about. I mean, they go to Little Rock and they're there to do our business, and this is part of it. So hopefully we can get some support.
I'm thankful that we did not have to drive.
Yes.
We had something that was personalized so that we could interact, because if it was a larger setting, we would not be able to have it catered more to what our needs are. So thank you.
Of course.
Thank you so much. Sure. Appreciate
Happy to be here.
Thank you for arranging.
Yes, thank you for the food.
before she left.
Yes,
Thank you, Nadine.
Nadine spoke the fear in me and told me she was going to be on vacation this week, and I better have everything ready to go last week. That's right. All right, thank you all.
Thank you, Mark.